Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Ali. It is a delight to see you in the chair. And I'm sure all colleagues will join me in taking my hat off to the genius of improvisation and quick thinking that allowed our colleagues, my honourable friend, the member for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale, and the honourable lady for Makerfield to take the chair, a vital element. And thank you at the end, Ms. Ali, for coming in and allowing us all to take our positions in the chamber. This has been a very good debate, very thoughtful, very constructive, very well informed, and on a very important topic. And I thank everyone who's made contributions to it. I think I particularly thank, and I'm sure everyone in the room will join me, my honourable friend, the member for Blackpool North and Cleveleys, for securing the debate, and also for his excellent and very thoughtful speech, which picked up themes that he has been pressing and that many of the other members who've spoken today have been pressing in the previous years and months. So I thank him very much indeed for that. His knowledge of and his engagement in these issues of cash access and the use of cash are very well known, and I thank him and I thank everyone for their contributions. As colleagues will be aware, I am not the Economic Secretary. He tragically is unavoidably detained with the trivial matter of the Financial Services Bill. He sends his apologies and thanks. I think it's been mentioned by several colleagues already in this chamber that in this debate that he has been very accessible to them in discussing these issues. You know his style. It's a very open and friendly one. We try to do that in the Treasury, and he's been an exemplar for that, and I'm sure that colleagues will continue to engage with him. But I'm afraid, compared to his grand mastery, I'm a very novice chess player in this area compared to his immense skill. Let me say this, though. It is clear that digital payments are, as the colleagues have discussed and mentioned, playing more and more of a role in the lives of people across the country and, of course, in the activities of business. And in many ways, this is to be profoundly welcomed. It allows for faster and cheaper payments. It allows for easier management of household and business finances. And those are the forces that have powered, in large part, the change hitherto. So the statistics are pretty clear. In 2009, some 58% of payments were made using cash. Just a decade later, in 2019, the number was 23%. So that has been an astonishing rate of change. But, of course, it has been exacerbated, accelerated by COVID, as colleagues have said in this debate. But I think it's important to say, and this brings out, that cash has not, by any means, had its day. It's still the second most popular form of payment in this country. According to figures published last year, there are reported 2.1 million people who are mainly using cash for everyday payments, and many of whom may be vulnerable, elderly, or on low incomes. But the pandemic has clearly had a marked impact on cash usage, and we recognise this. And as I think colleagues have noticed, the government has not been slow to press forward in this issue. And that, of course, creates the impetus, the energy that they have shown in bringing attention to these issues in the debate today. Let me reassure them, if I may, that the Treasury is working very closely with regulators and industry to try to ensure that people have access to essential banking services on the one hand and cash in particular. So, as colleagues will be aware, the Joint Authorities Cash Strategy Group only launched in May 2019, but very much engaged in facilitating coordination and seeking to ensure comprehensive oversight of the UK's cash infrastructure. If I may, I'll talk a little bit about the wider picture, and then I'll come to specific comments and questions that have been raised by colleagues in the debate. The group's chaired by the Treasury, and it brings together the Payment Systems Regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, and the Bank of England. The group's continued to try to coordinate efforts throughout the pandemic, and as the Chamber will be aware, in July 2020, the group published an update on the actions of its members. Also in the summer, the FCA and the PSR, the Payment Systems Regulator, published a statement setting out their approach to addressing issues in relation to access of cash, including local level areas that have lost access to cash. And then in September, the FCA introduced new guidance for banks, building societies and credit unions when they're considering closing branches or ATMs. So throughout the pandemic, I think it's fair to say then, the the regulators on one side and also industry, too, have taken steps to try to support customers that are reliant on cash, and they've included more proactive communications, cash deliveries to people's homes, and issuing carer cards to trusted third parties. And as a result, the vast majority of people have continued to have access to cash during the pandemic. But that, of course, does not address those who may have been struggling and whose position has been highlighted by many of the individual stories told in this debate as well. There is a question not merely of cash access, but of cash acceptance, as my honourable friend, member for Blackpool North and Clevedon, has highlighted. It is essential that the one is as essential as the other. And, of course, to help to control the virus, businesses and individuals have been encouraged to follow the latest government advice. That involves a range of measures to protect personal health, but also minimising contact in relation to transactions. Although it does remain the choice of an individual retailer whether to accept a particular form of payment, whether that be cash or card. What is interesting is how different groups, including, as I've mentioned, the FCA, PSO and the Bank of England, are joining forces to improve data collection and therefore a better understanding. My honourable friend, the member for Blackpool North and Clevedon, has raised the question of mandation. Government's position is not, it does not believe that mandating cash acceptance is the answer, but exploring means to incentivise the acceptance of cash is high on the agenda, and that was one of the key issues raised in the call for evidence. Now, if protecting cash to access is a complex issue requiring a long-term and collaborative effort, it's no less important that that work continue across industry, regulators and government. And the position of the ATM network has been mentioned by colleagues. Link, who are the largest network of ATMs, have taken action to ensure that remote and deprived areas continue to have access to free-to-use machines. The government's also working to bring forward legislation to protect access to cash and to ensure the nation's cash infrastructure is sustainable over the longer term, as the Honourable Lady opposite highlighted and as was prefigured in the March 2020 budget. But, of course, I'd be delighted to.
As well, it was the Association of Convenience Stores and their advice, their ideas for helping the ATM system. Has the Minister, and I realise it's not your responsibility, Minister, to be honest, but has the Department had the opportunity to talk to those people to see how we could work together, perhaps?
I thank the Honourable Friend very much. I don't know whether the Department has had the opportunity to talk to them specifically, but I do know that the issue is very much on the agenda, and certainly on the agenda of the Economic Secretary. I think it's important to realise and just to remind everyone that the call for evidence on access to cash only closed last week. So the timeliness of this debate is precisely in a way that it rams home that point, and rightly so. But it is merely a week, and it says more than I can for the high esteem which colleagues across the House must hold the government if they think we can make a decision without having published a response, having only received the having closed the call for evidence last week. But that is nevertheless a very important aspect to it. And let me just talk a little bit more about that. That set out the government's view that cash has a potential to continue to play an important role, cash back within the cash infrastructure, and also asked for views on how that can be achieved. It is we will publish a summary of responses to the call for evidence and set out steps alongside that in due course. But as colleagues will know, the call for evidence asked for views on key considerations associated with cash access, including deposit and withdrawal facilities, cash acceptance, regulatory oversight of the system. It set out the government's views on the aims of legislation, that it should be proportionate, it should be flexible, and it should be cost-effective, efficient and sustainable. But the government's view, and we should be perfectly clear about this, is that legislation will need to ensure that business and people can have access to cash withdrawal and depositing facilities within a reasonable travel distance as needed from their day-to-day lives. I think that's the central point that I would remind colleagues of. In legislating on cash, of course.
I accept that the purpose is to have reasonable access to cash within a travelling distance. Is that reasonable access to free cash machines within the travelling distance? Because that's a key point.
The answer is that the government absolutely recognises. I'm not going to comment on the shape of what is to come, but because I don't think that would be appropriate. But the government absolutely recognises the concern about free access to cash, as opposed merely. And as the Honourable Lady will know, a lot of work has been done on trying to preserve inclusivity in the face of market and pandemic-induced change that may be prejudicing that access. If I may, Honourable Lady, I really don't have much time, and I do want to give my honourable friend to respond to comments, and also give my honourable friend, the colleague, a chance to wind up. So let me just, if I may, press on with a couple of key things. In relation to cashback, I think it's worth mentioning that industry is already taking action to support cashback, and MasterCard and Visa have already announced incentives, and of course we have the community access to cash pilots. In relation to this set of authorities governing this, it's a question that's been raised. I think it's important to say that the government's view is that the FCA may well be the best positioned to take on the function of acting in a coordinating, overall responsible way, while also intending for the PSR and the Bank of England to continue their existing functions. And as colleagues will know, the FCA already has a statutory objective to secure an appropriate degree of protection for consumers and existing regulatory relationships with industry. The Honourable Gentleman asked a question about wholesale cash distribution, as I think he knows, there was a previous consultation paper by the Bank of England on the future of the cashless wholesale cash distribution model, which set out a high-level roadmap. A lot of work is being done between the Treasury and the Bank in order to address those issues. Responding to the Honourable Lady from Makerfield, she will be aware that there are existing policies within the Link ATM network in particular to protect the distribution of free cash and through ATMs. And the Treasury is supporting the Bank of England in trying to enable a sustainable model. And sustainable is important to permit effective wholesale cash distribution. I think I ought to sit down there, and I thank very much indeed colleagues for the very interesting and constructive contributions they've made to this debate.